Professor Sean Carroll, thank you so much, for being here. Like I always said to you that I'm a huge fan of what you do, and I've been following your work like for many years, and I remember like listening to the Mindscape podcast when like the very first episodes were just being released, and yeah,
Wow.
and it's actually and it's funny because actually I had the chance already to talk with the other Sean Carroll, Sean B.
Oh
Carroll,
yeah.
the biologist, and yeah, it was like I learned about him from one of your episodes, where you talked about like I remember the role of chance and randomness in evolution. It was one of my favorite, and still to this day one of my favorite episodes. And yeah, we had like a great dialogue, and it's just amazing for me because yeah, I feel like I'm checking things off the list now, like to talk with all Sean Carrolls, because
That's a good list. That's reasonable size. You can
yeah,
absolutely accomplish that.
because right now yeah, I'm and you know. I come from Ukraine, and right now speaking to you from the countryside area, like right now I'm staying with my parents, and it's relatively safe here. It's like for me like one of the values of like of what you do and the kind of public outreach work, like your books and podcasts is it helps me like to like gain a different perspective, and perhaps I don't get stuck, with this obviously like huge problems that we all have, and it's all very urgent. But yeah, you can sometimes um, like let your mind maybe like wander into these territories, and it can help like I feel like psychologically, provide some maybe
We got to
yeah
keep everything up a little bit. We have to fight to
yeah
the significant things, but we also have to remember what it's like to be a human being.
yeah exactly. So well to start off, I want to ask you. Uh, like I guess for people who do what you do, or people who pursue any kind of career, it all starts at a very young age. When they were just kids, maybe they got obsessed with something, and then it grew into this bigger thing. And so for you, would you say that like your fascination and like obvious love for science, would you trace that back to your childhood? Maybe you had a particular moment, uh, maybe like experience of looking up, or looking into a telescope or whatever that like have just stayed with you, and now as you look back, you realize that it's had a big impact on like what you ended up doing in life.
Yeah, it was definitely my childhood. I was maybe 10 years old when I first became interested in this stuff. I don't think that there was a moment. I don't think that there was like, a single event that set it off. It was more gradual, at least. I don't remember what the moment was. That was a long time ago. And it certainly was not looking through telescopes. I was back then and still am now very much a theoretical scientist. My tools are pencil and paper, not telescopes and microscopes. So I discovered books. I discovered our local public library had all these books about quarks and leptons and black holes and the Big Bang. And I wanted to think about that. And happily, I ended up doing it after a few years of effort.
Yeah, and it also seems to me like would you say that you've always been asking this kind of big questions, of existence, and you seem to me like as you seem to be someone who is not just into this like science questions, so-called, but you're also willing to embrace this, more like philosophical kinds of questions, the kinds of questions that science can't yet answer, or may never be able to answer, because it has limits. I guess like about questions about value and purpose. Would you say that like from when you were like a kid, from when you were like young, you uh, you were asking yourself these kinds of questions, or maybe it came in later?
I think that I was always predisposed to enjoy those questions and to think about them. I was not, when I was a kid, exposed to any serious level philosophical questioning or anything like that. I read science books when I was a kid, but I didn't read philosophy books. I didn't know they existed, honestly. I did not grow up in a household that was full of a lot of different kinds of books. So when I was an undergraduate, when I was in college, I was taking my first ever philosophy courses because they were required. I had no choice. And that's when I fell in love with that. So I think I was always ready for it, but I didn't really discover it. And even then, the kinds of philosophy I was very interested in studied as a college student were moral and political philosophy. I didn't quite make the connection that there were philosophical issues at the intersection of philosophy and physics. That didn't come until really much later when I was actually a researching scientist. And I realized there's not a boundary between physics and philosophy. There's a continuum, and there's plenty of questions that involve both. Plenty of questions that don't. You know, people will say, I'm a physicist. I want to measure the redshift of this galaxy. How does philosophy help me do that? And the answer is it does not. But if you want to know what happened at the Big Bang, then philosophy might actually be useful.
But would you say that then that there is, in some circles, tendency to like quickly dismiss, philosophy or any value from it? Because like you were saying, there are some realms, of physics where like it it may not be like most useful to apply some philosophical thinking, but there are other like big that's the questions that we're still struggling with, where science can be of great value.
Yeah, I think honestly, there's sort of a personality difference between successful physicists and successful philosophers. One of the things you need to be a successful philosopher is an enormous amount of patience. That is, someone asks a question like, well, why is this true? And you give an answer and they go, well, why is that true? Right? And you start down this chain. But the philosopher thinks that this is a useful use of your time, that you're actually learning something by really digging carefully into these persnickety questions. And the physicist is going to be impatient. They're going to say, what's the answer? I kind of don't care about why it's true, what the nature of fundamental reality is. Just tell me how the thing works. And both attitudes get you somewhere interesting. They're both ways of making progress, but they're not uniquely ways of making progress. Both attitudes can help under different circumstances. And so, like I said, there's some kinds of questions that are clearly physics questions. What happens when you measure a wave function? How do you calculate the probability of living somewhere in a multiverse? What is a natural or beautiful physical theory or a simple one? What do those words mean? These are obviously philosophy questions as well as physics questions. And physicists, despite or maybe because of their impatience, will often think, if I just sat back and thought about this for 5 minutes, I could figure it out. But that's not actually very successful. They don't come up with good ideas that way.
Yeah, and um, would you say, for example, that in our modern world, in modern society, we have this perception mentality that, for example, when it comes to science, that it's only valuable if you can use it. If you can make like a better car out of it, or like, but it's always strikes me because I guess that wasn't the reason at all that you went into science in the first place, because you just interested
Right.
in these big questions, but then maybe and you often don't realize it at the time, but then maybe later it can yield some amazing technology that like for example with quantum mechanics I know, and maybe you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think it's not always that physicists want to be applied in some way, right? I mean, there's plenty of people doing quantum field theory or string theory or something like that where there's no direct connection to technology or even what's observable in the universe. There's lots of physicists who are worrying about what happens when black holes evaporate. And we don't have any obvious prospect of observing anything like that. But what they do want is a way of making progress that is very concrete and demonstrable. The real issue I think a lot of physicists have with philosophy is they don't know how to make progress. So you can ask what happens when a wave function is measured in quantum mechanics and collapses, and you can have different opinions about it. But a physicist will say, well, how do I know which opinion is right? What is the experiment I can do? What is the calculation I could do that would show one or the other? And that's hard to do sometimes. Sometimes you just have to think about what the theory means, decide which theory makes more sense, and proceed on those lines. And so that's just not a way that physicists are quite comfortable with thinking.
And do you see like any positive value? For me, it's I observed this interesting phenomenon that happens, for example, with there are people like Richard Dawkins, and Lawrence Krauss, who go out in the world and they, it seems like they just want to wipe religion, off the face of this earth, and they don't like Dawkins says this, himself, like I'd like all religion to cease to exist, and but I. I view it, perhaps a little bit differently because, of course, when it comes to like explaining how the world, actually works, science has a huge win here. But for me, religion also can maybe provide again like a sense of comfort or solace, and maybe it's more about like how you respond, to the external world. It's more about like again, like because you mentioned philosophy, and for me, I put it in the same category, as like religion, philosophy, science, as just this role attempts to gain some, insight into the human condition, and I don't really like it, when there are there are like people who wanna just to just completely get rid of it, or I don't know. Do you see like any positive value at all from religion?
I think that there's two separate questions that sometimes get mixed up in the popular discourse here. One is whether certain religious beliefs are correct, right? Whether religion is true. And the other is, does believing these things have a good or bad impact on the world? And I think that these are really separate questions. And people have a belief, some people have a belief that religious claims are false, but that somehow doesn't satisfy them in saying that. They want to go further in saying that religion has done bad things to the world. I think religion has obviously done bad things to the world and obviously done good things to the world. And that's a very complicated sociological, political, historical, psychological question that I'm not qualified, honestly, to judge whether it's more on the positive side or negative side of the ledger. And especially when you compare it to the question of whether or not religious beliefs are simply true. I think that's a much easier question. Whether or not you think the answer is yes or no, it's a much more straightforward question than the sociology history question. So I always try to stick to that question. I'm very open to the idea that religious traditions have something to offer us in terms of thinking about who we are as human beings. It would be weird if the last 5,000 years of human thought was simply irrelevant to these questions. But I think that we should judge those claims just like we judge scientific claims. Show me the evidence. Let's think about the possibility. Let's judge it against what we observe in the world. We shouldn't just accept them because they're religious claims, but we should absolutely feel free to mine them for nuggets of wisdom.
Yeah, and I've always been curious about, how someone like you, who's got such a deep understanding of, of this topics, and who spent so much time like studying the universe, and especially on the largest of scales, like how does that impact your like everyday life? How does it affect you personally? Would you say like, for example, do you have maybe any moments of existential anxiety, from time to time, or like, when you just contemplating like the scales, the enormous scales of the universe, and maybe like like we're so tiny and seemingly like
Yeah.
insignificant. But I know like one of your amazing books, like The Big Picture, explores these kinds of questions, like how we make sense of it. And but yeah, maybe I'd love for you to provide some reflections on like, how does this at all like impact your your thinking, like is it go through like day to day?
It doesn't impact my day-to-day life that much, honestly. I think that the understanding that we have of the world at the human level needs to be consistent with the underlying understanding we have as working physicists or philosophers or whatever. But it's pretty easy to be consistent. As long as you don't think that God is going to come down and answer your prayers, you're probably going to more or less be compatible with the fundamental laws of physics. In terms of existential anxiety and the broader world, I think it's always there's two things. One is what are you comparing it to? Like what what do you imagine the alternative would be to the picture that we have actually constructed? You know, we've discovered through science and cosmology, et cetera, that the world is very, very big, that we are very, very small, the world considered as the universe, that the universe is old, and we're a more or less negligible part of it. And I do think that some people that engenders some existential anxiety. But how would you feel if it were the other way around? Like if you really were told, okay, the whole universe, all of existence will only last for 10,000 years. And it only is our Earth and nothing else, and maybe the solar system. I think that would be worse. I think that'd be a lot of pressure, right? I mean, I think that the idea that the world was not that big would also have its own forms of existential anxiety associated with it. So overall, I do not feel that. And the other thing is that I think that in practice, when I look at how people behave in the face of truly overwhelming events, I think that people who appreciate and accept the laws of physics and the picture of the universe that science has given us are doing at least as good a job and arguably a much better job at appreciating the world and accepting it. When something terrible happens, when someone you love dies, or when you are faced with death, there's no getting around the fact that these are emotionally trying parts of your life. But there are better or worse ways of dealing with that. And as far as I can tell, people who accept how the universe is deal with them at least as well.
Yeah, it's actually what I believe as well. And the examples I have in mind, like related to what you were just saying, are like Richard Feynman and Stephen Hawking, who like just putting them to take like things very seriously, and and I guess it's just because they of the perspective they had on the human condition and like and the universe that we all live in. And well I want to ask you, it strikes me because, for example, I love learning about the history of science, like going all the way back, to the ancient the ancient times, and then like obviously with the origins of modern physics, like Galileo, Newton, and so on. And it's always been amazing for me to see how this like obviously very brilliant people, like while having made some great discoveries, but they were also like resisting sometimes their own insights, or the insights that came from their theories. Like for example, Einstein famously didn't believe in the in the existence of a bunch of things that came out of his own theory. And but it's amazing to me because that science itself, as a like as a way of approaching the world, it can like transcend that, like that bias that we have. And yeah, it's just amazing. And that I also heard that in science um, you like you try to prove yourself right, but you often but we also need to prove yourself wrong, because and most of the time you turn out to be wrong, because like that nature doesn't adapt this these ideas that you have, and it's just amazing for me because it's not often how we go about life, how we do things in life. It's kind of it goes because many times we want to be right, and but it's like as a as a phenomenon, or as like it's for me that's like an insight in and of itself, that we can that we can like glean from maybe science. Or maybe you can elaborate on that, like the value, the scientific enterprise.
No, I think it's absolutely unmistakable that one of the benefits of science is that it provides us a way to judge whether certain things are true or false. Plus, by a technology and various methodologies that we've developed over the years, it pushes us into regimes that we're not personally familiar with, whether it's the microscopic regime of particle physics, or biology and cells and germs and things like that, or cosmology in the wider world. And the combination of these things, pushing us into regimes that we're not familiar with, plus having a way of deciding what's true or false, pushes us to accept things that we wouldn't naturally have accepted about the world. The scientific view of the world is different than the one that might have come together via myths and legends back in the day. And we also have trouble sometimes accepting these things, whether it's relativity, quantum mechanics, Darwinian evolution, the Big Bang Theory, whatever it is. Like when these theories don't quite comport with our usual way of thinking about the world, we can be resistant. And I do think that eventually we get there because the data are the data and they're going to decide at the end of the day. But sometimes we get there quickly and sometimes we get there very slowly. And that's that we can at least work to get there faster and to be more open-minded in the first step and then more accepting in the last step of what the world is trying to teach us.
But then there are also like limits not to it, to science as an enterprise. I feel like there is this very famous, I'm sure of Occam's razor, right? Like this
Yes,
idea,
sure.
yeah, that like the simplest explanations are like, usually the best ones. But and as I understand it, in physics, for example, uh, like you tend to, well, you like simplifying things, and you tend to look for like simple and assumptions, and you like your theories to be based on like very few and simple uh, like aspects. But for me, it seems like when it comes to the real world, the world that we actually navigate through, it doesn't work like that. It all, and sometimes people wanna also like keep it all simple and maybe like tend to simplify everything, but like because it's so complicated, the real world, like many things need to be taken into account. So I just see it as a kind of contrast, a difference between maybe you can speak to.
Yeah, I think that one thing you have to accept is that science is done by human beings, right? And human beings have their preferences. There's a joke that science proceeds one funeral at a time because, there were people who were very successful in their day and became very well-known scientists, but kept clinging to outdated beliefs long after their time had passed. And, finally we can get beyond it. I think it's a joke. It's an exaggeration, but it's clearly true that scientists have their favorite theories. We say that we're imagining the possibility that all sorts of different things can be true, and then we're letting the data decide. But the reality is that, we root for some theories. We hope that some things come true, and we are annoyed when other things come true. And we have to learn to accept what the universe is telling us. And again, ultimately, we always do, but there's a matter of how quickly we do it, or how long it takes us to give up on an idea that we were really hoping would work out, especially if you spent your whole career pursuing that idea and then it turns out not to work out. That's a tough one to accept.
But would you agree, for example, that physics is in large part guided by a certain search for like elegance and beauty, and is that totally justified? For example, lots of people mention string theory as an example, which hasn't been like tested, but it it seems very beautiful. And I know, like from science history, for example, we have the great astronomer Kepler, who was like, I remember, like obsessed with certain aspects of the universe, and he was like trying to find some reason for why that's for why that's so. But it was and spent years pursuing this, but it led nowhere because he was asking, I guess, the wrong question, and and his like beautiful picture or oftentimes are what seems like a beautiful picture just leads nowhere. But I don't know if how much of it you believe is true, that physics is like often about that like pursuit of elegance.
Well, this is another good question because the whole point, if you're a professional scientist, is you're trying to go beyond what we already understand, right? You're trying to push out there into the world of things that have not yet been figured out. So you're making hypotheses, you're suggesting theories, and then you're trying to figure out what works. And when two different people are confronted with exactly the same current data and current successful theories and are asked, well, what is the most promising way to go beyond those theories? They will come to different conclusions because they value different things differently. Some people will absolutely put a central emphasis on simplicity or beauty or whatever. Other people are going to say, well, does it fit in with other things that we know? Is it compatible with certain cherished beliefs that we have? Other people just have intuitive feelings about how the universe should work, and they're gonna like those better. So I actually think it's super important that we have diversity in this particular set of things. We make the most progress when not everyone has the same ideas about how to move forward in the next step. If you talk to a string theorist or someone doing loop quantum gravity, they each very honestly have very good arguments in favor of why their particular theory is the right way to go. And there are good arguments why that's not the right way to go. And it's a matter of saying, okay, there's arguments against my theory, but I think that we'll figure it out. I think that we'll overcome those arguments someday and do better. Well, that's your judgment. That's hard to say. We're going to have to wait and see. And that's why it is true and remains true that people will disagree until we finally figure it out once and for all.
And I think it's fair to say that well, quantum mechanics, when it was put in place, I guess it was around the year 1927 or something like this. Yeah, and I guess it was the most perhaps revolutionary period in science history, because it was like completely different and new
Right.
paradigm of physics, and has replaced classical mechanics, like in this in this very strange way that we're still kind of trying to grapple with, and it's and seems like and then we also, before that, we had Einstein, and 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 going further back, we had like Newton, and one of those greats of science. But it seems like nowadays, yeah, we don't have those kinds of revolutions anymore, right? And and I remember in one of your like interviews, you also said that we shouldn't be surprised by that, because things like that don't happen very often enough. Like, for example, when you have the first part of the 20th century just full of these revolutions, like Einstein's theory and quantum mechanics, and then also we began considering like Big Bang as like potential origin of the universe. Yeah, yeah, we shouldn't be surprised that it's not like happening today.
Yeah, I think again, there's 2 points I would make. One is you're completely correct that the first half of the 20th century was an absolutely unique time in physics. Special relativity, general relativity, quantum mechanics, the Big Bang theory, quantum field theory, all of these were created in that one brief 50-year period. And you could have gotten the impression that, the way that physics works is we have a revolution every 10 years, but that's not usually the way physics works. The second half of the 20th century was largely dealing with the aftermath of all those revolutions of the first half of the 20th century. And that puts us in a situation in the first half of the 21st century where we've mostly cleaned up all of the work we had to do post-revolution, and now we're in a situation where the theories kind of fit the data too well, right? We understand a lot. We know they're not the final answer. We know we're not done, but we're not being guided by new experimental discoveries, and that makes it very, very hard. The other thing is, of course, you can't predict ahead of time which subfields of science are going to be the exciting ones. I think there's lots of revolutionary things happening in biology and computer science right now, even if they're not happening in fundamental physics. So that's okay. That's one of the things we have to learn to adapt to. Maybe physics will be different in the third half, the second half of the 21st century, or even the second quarter. Who knows? But we gotta, we're not gonna get to the next revolution in physics unless we keep trying to plug forward with what we have now, whether or not there's a revolution every 10 years.
But it's amazing for me because for example, if you could bring Isaac Newton to the present moment, and for example, show him one of your books, the one you wrote about quantum mechanics, for example, or just give him a lecture about our modern, understanding of cosmology or whatever, I guess very little bit would makes any sense to him, and and there'd be lots of questions that he could not have possibly consider of in his lifetime. And it's amazing to me because it makes you wonder other questions that we haven't yet had the mental capacity to ask, because and maybe in 400 years time we'll have new kinds of paradigm shifts in our understanding, because well, lots of new we'll have discovered lots of new phenomena that we'll kind of have no idea exist now in the universe. I know it's just a fun question to ask, maybe. I don't know if you agree with it.
Well, it is, and it's absolutely possible, right? The revolution that was quantum mechanics in the first half of the 20th century. In fact, 2025 right now is called the International Year of Quantum because it's the 100th anniversary of Heisenberg's first formulation of sort of a correct version of quantum mechanics. It was a revolution in how we thought about nature at the deepest levels. And as far as we currently know, it works 100%. There's literally zero experimental evidence that quantum mechanics is not the fundamental bedrock of the universe. But of course, it might not be. Of course, it might be something different. And you're very welcome, and people do wonder, what would that different thing be? What would that more fundamental thing be? The problem is the reason we stumbled across quantum mechanics in the early 20th century wasn't because we were smart. It was because the experiments forced us to. We had black body radiation, we had the stability of matter, the photoelectric effect, the spectra of light coming from different atoms. There was all sorts of different experimental results that just couldn't be accommodated under classical mechanics. And as I said, right now we have zero experimental results that cannot be accommodated by quantum mechanics. So you're welcome to think about things, but if you imagine in 1880, if a physicist was trying to come up with a theory that would move beyond classical mechanics, would they have invented quantum mechanics? No, they would not have. It's just too hard. So even though I'm very open to the possibility there is something deeper out there, I don't think it's the most fruitful use of our time to worry about it. Like maybe a little bit, spare your a minute here and a minute there to think about it. But without guidance from the universe, it's just too hard.
And it's fun actually because you mentioned this quote that science advances one funeral at a time, and I was also going to bring this up. I guess it's by Max Planck, right? Yeah, or at least attributed to him, and it's it doesn't seem to you like science or like physics in particular is ultimately a young person show or like game because for example Einstein had his miracle year in 1905 when he was like 26, and like Isaac Newton when he was like 22 23 made this leaps, or at least got his first hints of what would later like become known as his laws and so on. And yeah, there are lots of examples like that throughout history that like when somehow when you're young, yeah, perhaps maybe you're more open to this like new ideas. I don't know. That's maybe depressing to you somehow, because once maybe you get past this certain period in your life, you're maybe less likely to make some revolutions. Maybe I don't know if you agree with it.
I think a lot of things go on here. I mean, one is that it is very natural that people become more set in their ways when they get older. You know, they've had success doing things a certain way and they're going to keep doing it. And it does, when you're a graduate student or very, very young, everything is new to you. Like you need to be thinking outside your comfort zone because you don't have any comfort zone. You're not really comfortable with anything. So you're naturally very open to ideas in a way that an older person is not. Older people are also better at seeing the reasons why new ideas don't work. I mean, certainly as an advisor to young students or as someone who has had advisors in my career, it's clear that, when you come up with a new half-baked idea, maybe there's something promising to it, but there's also some objections to it, and you need to decide whether or not those objections are overcomable. And old people are really good at saying what those objections are, and sometimes you have to push through what they're saying. But another thing is, as an older person, you just have more work to do, teaching and committees and building things and applying for grants and whatever it is. You don't quite have in the modern world the time to really devote yourself to thinking purely about new areas of physics or science more broadly or whatever. And those functions of teaching and applying for grants, those are also important functions. Someone needs to do them, and I'd rather have the 50-year-old people do them than the 25-year-old people do them, I suppose.
What kind of work are you doing now? What questions are you trying to resolve, or in
I
your
have
physics research?
I have two big areas I'm interested in. One is the intersection of the foundations of quantum mechanics with the emergence of spacetime. So I'm trying to figure out how spacetime comes to be from a purely quantum mechanical point of view. And I've written a few papers about that, and we're still moving forward. It's hard. There's a lot of details to be thought about, so we're thinking about those. And the other is complexity and the origin of complexity over cosmic time in particular. There's a lot of work being done in complexity in various different forms, but most of it looks very carefully at systems that are already complex, a human brain or a biological organism or the economy or what have you, and or an AI system. I'm trying to trace how complexity comes into being over the evolution of the universe.
And I love this idea that you develop in the big picture in one of your books that came out, I guess, what was it, like 2016 or something like this?
Yeah, about right. Yeah.
Yeah, but and we actually have it's interesting because I said the one behind you from eternity to here, right? And we have like Ukrainian version of it also, and
Oh,
the big
good. Very
picture,
good.
yeah, the big picture as well, yeah. And because I first got it in Ukrainian language, but then like yeah, and I love this idea that you develop, which basically, if you want to understand the world at a deeper level, you need to use a variety of different stories, right? And for example,
Mhm.
as you at the subatomic level, obviously, you need to invoke quantum mechanics and talk about how those particles interact and behave. But then, as you go up, you need um, talk in the language of the chemist or the biologist, and then as you go to more like the human scale level, you need to talk about philosophy and this like what consciousness is and so on. These are other kinds of stories, and yeah, I just I love that because it's once I read that, it just made a whole lot of sense to me, somehow like like and I don't know, it's was it like a revelation of some sort to you, or did you know how did you kind of did you gradually build this kind of picture, this perspective, or how did that come about? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think two things is that when I'm not very good at remembering how I started thinking things. It's not like I have keep a diary and go like, oh yes, brilliant realization. I figured something out. I'm much more gradual in my ways of doing things. So I generally my style is to think about lots of different things. That's why I have a podcast myself, Mindscape, where I talk to lots of different people doing different things, and that keeps my brain thinking in new ways, which I think is valuable. And I do think that again, everything has to be consistent, right? Like if you're doing physics and biology or moral philosophy, you can't have an entirely different view of the world when you're doing one of those than when you're doing the other. Now, it might not matter. It often doesn't matter. Moral philosophy is not very informed by particle physics in any way, but they need to be consistent. They need to ultimately describe the same world. So that and the fact that I'm willing and interested in talking to philosophers and thinking about how they like to think about these things. Not everything that philosophers do is all that interesting to me, but some things they do is super interesting to me. So that's been very, very helpful. It's very rare that you come up with what you think is a good idea, especially if it's not exactly in your field and nobody has come up with that idea before. It's somewhere out there, someone has been thinking about this. So someone says something and the philosopher friend says, oh, yes, David Hume said that in the 18th century. You're not saying anything new. But, David Hume didn't know about quantum mechanics or cosmology. So you do have to, put it into a slightly different framework. And it's fun and it's still ongoing. If I wrote the big picture now, 9 years later, it would be a slightly different book. I mostly agree with everything in there, but I would emphasize things that I've learned about in the interim. I haven't completely overthrown anything that I say in that book, but I do know more about it. I know some more sophisticated understandings of some of the stuff I talked about.
And there are questions that, at least to me, seems like they're fundamentally outside of the realm of science. For example, when you talk about value and or meaning or purpose, science, obviously can't measure or like determine those like features of reality. And in your view, for example, to me, the question of consciousness is like a very baffling one, and it seems like when I'm trying to figure out what it's like to be me or what it's like to be you,
Hmm.
it seems like a whole lot of work to do. And do you think that it also ultimately lies in that realm of fundamentally different kinds of questions, or you think that science will one day resolve this
I
issue of
think that science
consciousness?
will resolve it fine. I think that again, this is just like the questions about quantum mechanics or the origin of the universe. This is a set of questions that involves both science and philosophy in a deep way. And one of the reasons why we don't make progress quite as fast as we would like to is that, the people who are professional neuroscientists and psychologists are different than the people who are professional philosophers. Now, they're much closer. The neuroscientists talk to philosophers and the philosophers talk to neuroscientists much more then philosophers of physics talk to physicists and back and forth. So I give them credit for that. I think it's like more obvious that when you ask about consciousness and the self and things like that, philosophy is a relevant discipline to talk to. So they have conferences together and the whole bit. But at the end of the day, I think that consciousness is very hard. It's very, very difficult to understand what's going on. But that's perfectly natural that it's very, very hard. The human brain is one of the most complicated things that we literally know about in the universe. We should absolutely expect that consciousness is hard to understand. And the laws of physics are simple to understand. We understand those really, really well. So if there's some apparent tension between our understanding of the laws of physics and our understanding of consciousness, to me, it seems overwhelmingly promising to think that we need to improve consciousness, not that we need to change the laws of physics.
But the human brain, like, as complicated and as it is, it's still. I'm sure you know this famous thought experiment. It's still like we're still like 1.2 percent like different in terms of our DNA, from like chimpanzees, and for example, if you try and imagine of what some alien civilization, might be like, they could be far more advanced. And do you think that I just what you make of the famous Fermi paradox? Do you think that there is alien life out there, and if it ever gets to the point of being like intelligent and intelligent enough to like to make civilization and like send spacecraft, or do you think that we're like alone here?
Well, I don't know. I honestly think that this is one of those questions where it would be difficult to have a strong opinion either way. On the one hand, there's very good arguments that life shouldn't be special here on Earth. There's plenty of planets out there. We're not all that special. On the other hand, there's very good arguments that if life were out there, we would have noticed already, and we haven't. So I'm very open. It's possible that there's just not that much life. It's possible that there is life, but it's all simple and single-celled and not very complicated. It's conceivable to me, but less likely, that there is a lot of advanced intelligent life, and for some reason we haven't noticed it yet. I'm open to that possibility just because there's a lot of things I don't understand about the universe. But, I do think that we should, we need to think carefully about what it would mean to be more advanced than human beings. Not that it's impossible to be more advanced. I'm sure it's very, very possible, but it's not some linear extrapolation of where we are to something new, because there are dramatic changes from time to time. And maybe there are dramatic changes in our future, and maybe that helps explain why we haven't met any other civilizations. This is something where humility is called for, I think.
But it's interesting for me because even though we know so little about it, then it still doesn't make it any less, compelling, or like for me to contemplate this kind of possibilities. Just so fun, to think that there might be someone else out there. But I may be a little bit biased here because I come from Ukraine, and like we're dealing with this like Russian
Right.
invasion, obviously, and as sometimes especially on some of my dark days, I take the view that maybe they're just doomed to destroy themselves now. Like once they reach a certain like point in technological development, yeah.
Yeah.
Just because from what we're seeing here on this planet.
Yeah, here in the United States, things are sometimes discouraging also in a very different way, obviously. But, life seems resilient. There will be ups and downs in the next million years of biological evolution, I'm quite sure, or the next billion years. But it's harder than you might think to imagine ways that human beings could literally wipe out life on Earth. Okay. I mean, it's easy to imagine ways we could do tremendous damage, but literally extinguishing all of life on Earth is very, very difficult to do. Space travel is also very hard to do. It's very, very expensive. It's way more difficult to imagine sending human beings to live comfortably on other planets, even here in the solar system, than a lot of people talk about. So it's possible that, there's intelligent civilizations out there that are flourishing but have just decided to stay home, right? That's absolutely one of the possibilities. So I think, it is possible to get depressed about conditions here on Earth right now. And the worst scenarios are ones we should take seriously, if only because we want to learn how to try to avoid them. But it's absolutely not the most likely way for things to go. We should worry about them, but we should not think that they're inevitable.
But what do you make, for example, of the argument that we don't very often just stop by and look at how the ants are doing, or whatever. This obviously, intelligent or like there are plenty of intelligent animals in their own right, but they don't seem at all like they would be interesting for us now. And maybe that's the case also here.
Yeah, I
Because
think it's very interesting to contemplate different different ways that intelligence can manifest itself. We do tend to be anthropocentric. We think about human beings and think about things not that different. And indeed, I think I've talked to a few biologists on the podcast. There are reasons why human beings have two legs and two arms and two eyes and a brain and things like that. But that's sort of a one possible solution to the problem of intelligence and using knowledge and information to succeed and flourish in the world. There's absolutely other ways. Maybe it's a collective kind of intelligence, like you say, with the ants. Maybe it's distributing duties among different subparts of your species differently. Maybe it's augmenting your intelligence artificially in all sorts of ways. Octopuses are kind of intelligent, but in an entirely different way than humans. So yeah, I'm very, very open-minded about that. I think that, we should continue. We're just beginning to really think about this stuff systematically.
is there some question that you've been like grappling with, that you've been trying to to figure out, but but just can't wrap your head around? Maybe some big mystery that you would love to see solved maybe in your lifetime. Maybe it could be from physics or from science more generally.
Yeah, I want to know what happened at the Big Bang. That's what I want to know. In the sense that that's something that I can actually imagine making progress on myself. Um, I think that there's, like I said before, consciousness and thinking and things like that. These are harder problems than the Big Bang. So I have some chance of understanding quantum gravity and singularities and what happened in the early universe. And we have some data on it, even though not nearly as much data as we would like. That's a very specific thing that I think it is plausible to imagine making progress on. We've had an issue for almost 100 years now. It's about time to figure it out. The stuff about complexity is a very, very different kind of problem because it's much more low-hanging fruit in some sense, in the sense that there's much less that we understand about the very nature of complexity than we do about cosmology in a very direct sense. So it's harder to know what breakthroughs there are to be made there. But certainly there's plenty of room to make breakthroughs in that field too. So that's why I'm very excited about it.
Okay, just a fun question, and you might have been asked this before, but for example, if we do a little bit of time travel, and if you could meet anyone from from human history, like who would it be, and what would you like to ask them? Maybe it doesn't have to be a scientist, but
Yeah.
or you could pick a scientist.
I don't know. I have been asked that question before. I don't have a great answer. I am a believer that we accumulate knowledge in various ways. So I often make the remark that I understand general relativity much better than Albert Einstein ever did, even though he invented it. And it's not because I'm smarter than Albert Einstein, it's because we've made progress and I get to stand on the shoulders of giants, right? Albert Einstein died in the 1950s without ever knowing what a black hole was, right? So I don't feel a need to go back and talk to scientists of the past to get help doing science. I think that as a general rule, people today are just as smart as people in the past, but we have the benefit of having some accumulated knowledge there. So I think that if you're going to talk to someone from the past, you should do it for sort of historical reasons. You want to hear what it was like. I would like to talk to Galileo. I think that he's, one person who, was a remarkable person in many ways, and was really there at the birth of modern science, and obviously was thrown under house arrest by the church. He carried out correspondence with Kepler about the nature of the solar system. And he was a really interesting guy. So, that's my standard answer, but I'm very willing to change my mind if someone comes up with a better one.
But for me, like Isaac Newton, like would have been just fascinating to talk to, because he had obviously made great breakthroughs, but also had, as a character, he was very, very interesting guy, and
He was, well, I worry that Isaac Newton would just be a jerk, honestly. So I don't know.
well, I have this. I hopefully you'll be able to see this. Um, it's
Like,
the famous
oh, is it the
pale
pale
blue
blue
dot,
dot?
blue dot.
There we
Yeah,
go.
yeah,
Very good.
yeah.
Yes.
And I bring up this image because it's it's interesting for me. I once I first saw this when I was a little kid. Just many years ago. First saw this online, and just it stuck with me because I first I had never imagined that our planet Earth could look literally like this. Like this tiny pale blue dot. As Sagan himself like beautifully put it, and I just always thought of it as this like enormous ball, giant ball, and but then obviously his description, as well known of like the value and significance of our like fragile planet, it just has completely changed the way I look at things. And right now, especially I every now and then I return to it and listen to it. Because
Mm.
it does give me some solace, especially when he talks about uh, think of all that blood that has been and all those wars that have been fought over that little tiny pixel of fraction of that, and maybe they have um, maybe like a particular like favorite science fact or whatever or observation uh, that for example when I first learned about it, it was just so mind-blowing to you, and still like never like amazes you, because for me this kind of image is in that category, because it's even today even though I first saw it many years ago, but yeah, I'm still amazed by how small it can seem, but for us it's like everything. But maybe you have
I think it goes two ways. On the one hand, things like the pale blue dot photograph, or for me also, just things like pictures of galaxies, the Hubble deep field image, which you just get by pointing the telescope at the sky and letting it discover all these galaxies deep, deep, deep into the ancient past. It makes us seem very small. I absolutely get that. Our insignificance is made very unmistakable. But on the other hand, we did that. We took those pictures, right? We human beings stuck here on Earth, not understanding electricity just a couple hundred years ago. Now we're building spacecraft that fly out there and take pictures of other galaxies and of ourselves and are leaving the solar system. And I think that that's absolutely something to be proud of as our little species. So, we're tiny, but I think that we're doing pretty well, all things considered, and hopefully we'll be able to do even better things going forward.
no, I love how we can actually flip that script now, and yeah, uh, the fact that we made it this far, it's like itself, quite remarkable, and it doesn't take anything away from the pride, I guess. So, I'd love for you maybe to provide some reflections on, this full-scale war has been going on for more than 3 years, at this point, and things look, very unstable now, as I'm sure you know, with like the new, with the new U.S. administration, it raises a lot of questions about the future of support for Ukraine and the future of this war more generally. And I'd love to hear if you have maybe some, if you can maybe offer some words of wisdom or provide some, share some message to like young Ukrainians, people like me, because well, I'll be honest with you, I oftentimes feel very anxious about what to do in the future, and I'm sure that's in part like maybe a feature of my adolescence. I'm still quite young, but I think it's also this war impacts this to a huge extent, and and remember in your email you also mentioned that one of your graduate students is from Ukraine, right? And I don't know if you bring up this topic with him at all, or maybe you keep it all about like physics research. But yeah, I don't know what message would you like to spread to Ukrainians, maybe on how to remain hopeful, how to keep having maybe an optimistic outlook on life. I know it's maybe difficult for you because you don't live in that kind of environment, but still. Still, maybe you have some words to share on that.
Yeah, I have enormous admiration for the people of Ukraine. They have been fighting a really, really difficult battle against impossible odds in a really admirable way. And I hope that, I think that even though the United States has sort of been stumbling in treating this in the right seriousness that it should, other places in the world are hopefully going to step up. And, I do think that life goes on in a way that it becomes trickier when you're in these extreme circumstances. You want to, like I said before, you have to devote some energy, maybe a lot of energy, to simply surviving, to, defending yourself, to making sure that you have the rights of self-determination, etc. And some of your life has to go beyond surviving. It has to be thinking about physics or art or music or love or food or whatever it is. And different people are going to balance that differently. But I think that there's no quick short answer. You gotta keep fighting, and it's a journey, not a destination. And we're never going to get to the point in human history where you just say, okay, good, we're done now. Everything is good. We've all fixed it. It's always going to be a struggle against bad things happening, and hopefully the worst possible moments don't last forever.
Okay, I had to say that one of my all-time favorite episodes of yours. It was the one you did the solo episode about the meaning of life. It was I guess the 100th episode, and I absolutely loved it because well, first I loved the way you structured it. When you first talked about the science of life and what we know about it from evolution and so on. But then you moved to this more into this more philosophical questions of value, of meaning, and how do we make sense of this knowledge that science has given us, and basically what is the purpose of our life. And I love that in the in the end where you talk about the just the importance of the search for truth, for what you believe to be true about the world. And I very much feel that's exactly what we're all doing as Ukrainians. we are fighting for something that we like deeply believe to be true. We're like for our sovereignty and freedom and yeah, independence. And yeah, I just love that because it's yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me because but, like well, like you were talking about in your book Big Picture. These are kinds of questions you can't like extract them from like pure fundamental science, but they're nonetheless very important to us as human beings. It's just like a high level kind of truth, maybe, if you can elaborate on that.
It's part of being a human being is that you live life on many levels at once. And like I said, that we're all obeying the laws of physics, but the idea of what is right and wrong, and the idea of how to live your life. Oops, you disappeared, but there you're back. Um, the idea of how to live your life, how to tell right from wrong is not obvious, very important, not fixed by the data, something we all have to struggle with ourselves. It's not given to us by the outside world. And, some people get it wrong, in my view, but also I'm very pleased with how many people get it right.
Yeah, I'm very sorry. I just had to turn on the lights, because it's getting dark here already. So
Okay,
yeah,
no
yeah,
worries.
yeah. We have different, very different
I'm
time
sorry,
zone.
but I do kind of have to go if we're
Yeah,
near
yeah.
the end.
Yeah. Sure. I don't wanna. Well, I don't want to obviously to take too much of your time, but it's just been wonderful for me, to get to talk to you. Like I said to you at the outset, I've been like a huge fan of your work for literally for years, and you're someone who I wanted to talk to, for years. But when I was just, it's amazing because when I was just starting to listen to your podcast, like my English really sucked back then, but now it's better. So I could actually,
Seems fine now.
yeah, I could actually be talking with you, and yeah, yeah, I just want to say that you're someone uh, who's informed a lot of my thinking on this issues, and through your like writing and podcasts. So yeah, I'm very grateful that you've decided to take some time out of your schedule and to chat with me. It's
Well, I'm
been
very glad it worked
of
out. It
fun.
was a very fun conversation to
Yeah,
have.
yeah, it's been so much fun, and yeah, let's hope that things will get better, and perhaps I could travel to your country, and maybe we could have a beer and talk about some of this
Sounds good. Let's look forward to that.
mysteries. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day. Okay, bye.
Very
Bye
much.
bye.
Thanks, you too.
Yeah, take care. Bye.